It's lovely to be here. Unfortunately, it's only a very short visit. I have to go straight back. I can't stay the night and enjoy the Manchester nightlife. What I wanted to talk to you about in the next half an hour is I'm going to start with the notion of disruption and try and unpack a little bit what that means. I'm then going to give you a broad overview of some of the key technologies that have had an impact in education over the last 30 years or so. And then I'm going to sort of get us to look a little bit about what does it mean in terms of good quality e-learning, and why is e-learning in particular important. And then I'm going to come back to the notion of disruption and look at it from three aspects. The notion of the flipped classroom, which has been discussed a lot recently, new approaches to adopting more open practices, and learning design. So the notion of disruption goes back to Christensen, and I would characterise it in terms of four ways. First, it's about change in some ways, and we know that technologies are constantly changing the way we do things. It's about something new. It's about the unexpected. None of us could have predicted the impact that the internet would have on us. And it's only 21 years old, which is quite amazing. We expect nowadays to be online, accessible all the time. And it's about ultimately changing mindsets. I was recently in Sweden and I went down to breakfast and I saw this. It was an iPad, and you clicked on the relevant picture and it dispensed your juice for you. And I just thought, Steve Jobs is probably turning in his grave. I bet he couldn't have imagined this use of an iPad. And we've just seen another example here as well, which I thought was very interesting. Some of you will probably have seen on Facebook the video that's going around. It's a father and daughter. And the daughter says, "What do you think of your new iPad, Dad?" And he said, "Oh yeah, it's great." And she said, "You know, what apps are you using?" And he turns around and he's using the iPad as a chopping board. So, which is quite funny. There's a lovely video, I'm not going to show it today, but it's a lovely video by Ken Robinson, which is about, there's a Freudian slip for you, it's about nine minutes long. And he argues that today's educational system is outdated, and we're trying to educate students for a future, for careers that don't even exist at the moment. And the current system, which is still predominantly based on knowledge recall, is outdated, and we need to change things significantly. In terms of disruptive technologies, there's a nice book by John Norton, which came out a couple of years ago, where he argues 9 characteristics of the internet. And in particular, he argues that disruption is a feature of the internet, not a flaw. And in terms of education, I like this quote from Einstein: "Education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think." I'm just going to show you a very short video, which is from Pearson's, which I think gives us a good picture of what the future might look like in terms of use of technologies. I won't say anything about the acting.
That's a little later in the course. Now, the baboon's heart was just about the size of a walnut.
Simone, I thought you might want to know that we're passing the Loma Linda Medical Center in a few blocks, site of the very first animal-human heart transplant in the U.S. I see they give tours. Would you like to schedule one?
Not today. How about on Saturday? Then I can bring the kids with me.
The first one starts at 10 a.m. on Saturday. It looks like they're all available at that time. I'll put it on your calendars.
Simone is taking a massive online course right now as a part of her nursing studies, and a number of technologies just came into play. Geolocation and instant notifications allowed her computer assistant to know we had passed in front of a significant landmark in the study of the human heart. At the same time, the heads-up display on the inside lenses of her glasses allowed her to see an augmented reality view of the Loma Linda Medical Center. This was a great teachable moment.
Help! I need help down here! Hurry! I don't know what's happening. I just found him laying here. I don't know what's wrong with him.
Galileo, I need an analysis of this plant.
Acrediting, also known as wolfbane or the queen of poisons, contains...
Stop, Galileo! Notify ER of possible toxic shock. Also bring out a poison protocol.
did you miss here?
I'm not sure.
Can anyone help out here? Proper restriction? Yes. But remember, that the enemy can become constricted.
I think that's a really interesting video. I don't know about you. There are 4 of them on the Pearson's website, and I think it's clear that technologies are going to increasingly have a massive impact in terms of the way we teach our students.
That message has just come up on screen, not slightly nearer the reality.
What's it? What did it? I didn't see what.
Words just stopped working.
Yes. Well, at least it's not working now and not a few minutes ago. But no, that's true. And I'm going to come back to the barriers in a few minutes. It is a big issue. This is a kind of timeline of what I think are some of the key technologies. And I go back to the 80s when we got tools to be able to create rich multimedia resources. The internet, the web rather, of course, in 93. Learning objects, the notion that instead of us all creating 101 economics courses that we combine together and create one and share and repurpose. Learning management systems, which I think were important for 2 reasons. Firstly, they made institutions realise that technologies were a core part of the service we offered students, not peripheral. And secondly, they enabled us as teachers to experiment and play with using technologies for learning. First generation of mobile devices, rather laughable in comparison to the ones we have now. Learning design, new approaches to designing to help teachers make more effective use of technologies, and I'll come back to some of the work we've been doing on that. Gaming technologies, gaining more interest again now, interestingly. Open educational resources, the kind of follow-on from learning objects, fueled by people like the Hewlett Foundation and UNESCO. Social and participatory media. And I don't know about you, but certainly the way in which I use my blog, Twitter, Facebook has transformed my practice. Anybody else use Twitter here? What do you use Twitter for? Lady with the red iPad? Yeah.
What do I use Twitter for? A little bit for communicating with students sometimes, but mostly for sort of keeping up to date with accounts like Madam, accounts, stuff like that.
It's great the kind of resources you come across, isn't it? And I notice in Facebook, quite often people say, I'm doing this with my students next week. Has anybody got any suggestions? Or, trivial things like somebody last night said, I'm going to Westminster for a late birthday for my son. Can anybody recommend a good restaurant? But it's interesting the way in which we interact now. Anybody over here with Twitter? Yeah? Drew?
Mainly, I actually post from conferences. Mostly use them at conferences.
Yeah, it's useful, isn't it? Because it means... Yeah, it's useful, isn't it? Because it means even if you're not at a conference, you can get some kind of flavour of it by following the back channel. Virtual worlds, interestingly, big in 2005, virtually unheard of now. We hardly hear anything about them. Anybody still using Second Life or virtual worlds? Oh, what are you using it for, Gary?
I use it for meetings and for events as well.
Oh.
Regular kind of conferences.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
lots, but it's still part of the picture.
Yeah. Well, the people in the field say it is going to come back in. I think once the technology gets a bit simpler and easier, it might be appropriate. E-books and smart devices, massive open online courses, and then finally the latest buzzword, of course, is the notion of learning analytics, being able to harness the mass of data underneath our virtual learning environments to be able to better understand what our learners are doing. The new Media Consortium Horizon reports are a good indication of the technologies that are likely to have an impact in 1, 3 and 5 years' time. In the 1 year time frame, they talk about online, hybrid and collaborative learning and the use of social media. Then the Creator Society and things like 3D printers, learning analytics and it's linked to assessments, agile approaches to change, and making online learning natural. There's a nice video, I think it's by a company called Cornell, where it shows you learning across different surfaces. Things like you put an iPhone down and you flick and the image goes onto the surface and then you can manipulate it. And there's a nice bit where some kids have got an iPad and they take a picture of a footprint of an animal, and immediately it comes up and shows them what animal that is. What's that app? Is it Shazam, the one where you can listen to the music and it tells you the song? I heard somebody tell me the other day that there's an equivalent app now to be able to tell you what a bird song is. So you can hear a bird and then it'll tell you it's a blackbird or a robin or whatever, which I think is really interesting. I think in particular, the Innovative Pedagogy series produced by the Open University is really excellent. They list 10 technologies that are likely to have a major impact in the coming years. They talk about MOOCs, but in particular pushing back to promote the more social aspects of MOOC and the original idea, of course, of connectivist MOOCs, and I'll come back to MOOCs later in the talk. Design informed by learning analytics, so you've got a relationship looking at what the students are doing and then iteratively improving your design as a result. The notion of the flipped classroom, which I'll come back to. Bring your own devices, for example. How many of you have got iPads or smart devices? It is amazing, isn't it, how many people have them now? You see them everywhere. Learning to learn. And then there's the following 5: dynamic assessment, events-based learning, learning through storytelling, threshold concepts of concentrating on those things that are really difficult in a subject and how technology can enable that. And finally, the notion of bricolage, or learning by doing. And if you haven't seen those reports, I would thoroughly recommend them. For each one, they go through and do a very detailed critique. And of course, they're available online. So going back to your point about the screen message, despite the potential of technologies, we're still not seeing massive uptake. When we did a review of the use of Blackboard at Leicester, we found that 95% of the use was simply as a content repository. So we're really not harnessing the power or the affordances of technologies. And one of the key things is that staff are just bewildered by the plethora of possibilities. They just don't know where to start. They lack the necessary digital literacy skills, and there's no reward. And you'll be very aware of that here at Manchester. Do I spend 3 hours innovating my teaching, or 3 hours writing a bid or writing a paper which is likely to get me promotion? It's a no-brainer. So that's still a massive issue, and it's an issue that's not going to go away, I think. And research, of course, always been privileged over teaching. I remember when I started teaching in chemistry, I really liked kind of creating learning resources for my students, but I was kind of doing it under the table because I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing that. I knew I was supposed to be concentrating on my research. The difficulty of scaling innovation, and of course forums like this are very important because it gives you a way in which you can share good practice, and lack of appropriate support. So what about how do we facilitate good learning, and how do we ensure good quality learning, which is the theme of today's afternoon of seminars? I think it's about encouraging reflection. Reflection is incredibly important. Enabling dialogue in different ways. Fostering collaboration. Finding ways in which we can apply the theory that we're teaching our students to practice. Enabling creativity. Helping to motivate students. And creating a community of peers, not just between the students and the teachers, but perhaps through beyond the course cohort. So you mentioned that you used yours with your students sometimes. So having a hashtag for a course and getting other experts to come in and contribute. So why is e-learning so important? I think there are two main reasons. Firstly, in terms of the ways in which we can foster a rich variety of different forms of interaction with rich media, communication and collaboration, helping to develop students' digital literacy skills. Yes, they may be technologically competent, but that doesn't mean they're able to use technologies for academic purposes, and we need to teach them those skills. The ways in which we can foster different kind of pedagogical approaches and creativity and innovation, and connecting students beyond the formal course. And a number of MOOCs now are kind of sandwiched. There's a sort of formal whole course, and then you've got a part of that course is linked into a wider MOOC community. And secondly, as I said, we're going to be teaching students to do jobs that don't even exist today. How many of you have changed careers more than once? Yes. Yeah. So it's amazing how many of us have. I mean, I started life as a chemist. When I finished my PhD in chemistry, I assumed that I continued to be a lecturer in chemistry until I retired. And of course, I've changed domains significantly, radically since those days. Increasingly, employers are wanting students that are technologically competent. And of course, technology is now pervasive in all aspects of our life. So I thought, as the theme was quality, it'd be worth just reminding ourselves of some of the definitions around quality. The standard is something as measured against other things of the same similar kind, the degree of excellence of something, the condition which determines how effective and successfully learning takes place. In a review in 2010 with a colleague, Yossi Alivizu, we did a review of the use of technologies, and in particular social media, particularly in a higher education context, and that report is available online. And we came up with these characteristics of social media. They're open, they're networked, they're complex and constantly changing, they're participatory, they're distributed, they're dynamic, they're social. Distributed is obviously very important because I've got it twice. So I wanted to focus in on 3 examples of disruptive learning. The flipped classroom, opening up education through OERs and MOOCs, and learning design. So in terms of the flipped classroom, there's a couple of links at the bottom to a very good EDUCAUSE report and this graphic here, which kind of encapsulates what the flipped classroom is about. So it's about changing from a lecture-centric to an active or student-centred approach. So students are required to watch videos or interact with materials in advance of the class, and then the classroom is used to promote more collaborative and active problem-based activities. And I think the flipped classroom is particularly important given the rise and pervasiveness of mobile devices. In terms of OER, I think there was a naive assumption that if we just created OER repositories, they'd be used. An evaluation has shown that that's not the case. They're not being used extensively by either learners or teachers, and they're certainly not being repurposed. So in a project called Opal, we looked at the practices around the creation and use of OER, and we studied over 60 OER initiatives worldwide. And then we came up with a metro map for the 4 key stakeholders of OER: policymakers, organisational leaders, teachers and learners. And for each one there's a series of points that you can go through to look at the vision of openness and open practices, and then a kind of roadmap for implementation. In a follow-up project, Power Up, which is just finished, we looked at over 500 OER initiatives. We did 33 very detailed country reports looking at the state of education and the level of e-learning maturity and what kind of OER activities were happening. We did 7 in-depth case studies of OER communities. We did 3 EU-level policy documents and 8 policy documents in different contexts. And all of that material is available from the Power Up site. In a current project, we're looking at ways in which we can accredit non-formal and informal learning. And the challenge is, what kind of appropriate business models might there be so that students can come and get credit? There's an organisation called OERU, whereby there's an international consortium of institutions. A learner can learn through any OERs or MOOCs and then go to Athabasca in Canada or UNISA in South Africa and say, OK, I want credit from your institution for this amount of learning. And we've come up in VM Pass with what we're calling a learning passport to enable that accreditation of informal and non-formal learning. It has information from the provider of the free resources, the learner, and information from the assessing or certifying institution. And finally, a project that we've just finished, OpenCred, also looked at assessment mechanisms, and we looked at the degree of formality of recognition and the robustness of the assessment, and then mapped different institutions across that framework. We also came up with 4 facets of accreditation of open learning: the degree to which the learning process is open, the formality of assessment, the formality of recognition, and the flexibility of the learning process. And then for different case studies, we could map against that, those 4 dimensions. So MOOCs have become increasingly prevalent, and there's a lot of discourse. I mean, every day on Facebook there must be about 5 or 6 articles being passed around. Whether they'll survive or not is an interesting question, but I think they're important because they're challenging traditional institutions to say, What does it mean to pay to be a student at the University of Manchester? What's distinctive about Manchester as opposed to Bristol, for example? And we're also seeing very interesting new business models emerging, and we're starting to understand a lot more about ways to accredit informal and non-formal learning. If you want to know more about MOOCs, in particular in relation to quality, the European Foundation for Quality in E-Learning has got an excellent series of 12 MOOCs from some of the key people in the field, like Stephen Downes, Dave Cormier, etc., where they critique different aspects of quality and MOOCs. And the debate's still very much out as to whether they're good or bad. I took part in a conference debate about a year and a half ago at an Accrediting conference, and I was leading the 4 team, and I thought this is going to be dead easy, we're going to win hands down, no problem. We lost. Not only did we lose, we lost massively. Out of about 400 people in the room, 1 person voted for us. And she came up to me and said afterwards, "I'm really sorry, I only voted for you because I felt sorry for you." Which is not one of my finest moments, I have to say. But the video is there online, and it's actually very good. It's very funny that the Against team really had a slick presentation. We said they were good because they were free, they enable people to be part of a distributed global community, and they could foster, or should foster, social inclusion. Although the reality is the majority of people taking MOOCs have already got 1 or 2 degrees. The Against team said it was high dropout rates. I mean, we hear figures of 98%, although some of the more recent evaluations, for example, we did with FutureLearn, the 2 courses that we did at Leicester, we had about 48% of people still there at the end of the course. So the dropout rates are changing quite significantly. The Against team said it was about learning income, not learning outcome, and merely a marketing exercise. MOOCs have been classified, of course, into C MOOCs, connectivist MOOCs, which was the original MOOC in 2008 by George Siemens and people, and X MOOCs, the more kind of linear didactic MOOCs, from people like edX and Coursera, etc. But I feel this dichotomy is a bit naive, really. It doesn't really explain the kind of nuance of varieties of different MOOCs we're actually seeing. So I came up with a taxonomy consisting of 12 dimensions, 3 to do with the context of the MOOC, how open it is, not all are open, how massive and diverse, and 9 dimensions to do with learning, how multimedia is being used, how communication, collaboration and reflection are being fostered, whether there's a guided learning pathway. A lady here was mentioning that she was part of a MOOC that we ran, which was led by the Open University on learning design some time back. I don't know if you remember, but there were 2 pathways through the materials. There was the kind of light version and then the full stream. So we kind of had guided learning pathways. What kind of quality assurance there is, and that MOOC, for example, was very heavily quality assured. Whether there's any certification and link into formal learning, and the degree of learner autonomy. So to conclude this bit, I want to just map out where OERs and MOOCs sit alongside more traditional forms of learning. So we can look at 2 dimensions, learning individually or socially, formally or informally. And the top left-hand side, we've got traditional campus-based and distance learning courses. If we add in the social dimension, we go to blended courses. OERs and X-MOOCs sit on the bottom left-hand side, and then, of course, if we add in the social dimension, we get things like C-MOOCs. And we can move across this landscape in different ways. So, for example, we can go from informal to formal through traditional APEL routes, through e-portfolios, through things like the OER University that I mentioned earlier, and through badges. So finally, I wanted to conclude by talking about learning design and coming back again to the point you mentioned about the issue of the technology breaking down or not doing what we want it to do. So yes, there are masses of ways in which technologies can be used to support learning and lots of free resources, but the reality is they're not being fully exploited. We're seeing lots of examples of bad pedagogy, and teachers, if you ask them, and we have, say they haven't got the time or the skills. And this matches very nicely with a survey that came out recently from ILDE, the Association of Learning Technologies. They list things which are problematic, like lack of resources, reliance on individual champions, lack of credit and recognition, etc. So a group of us in the UK and Australia have been working since about 1999 to develop a new approach to design to help teachers make more effective design decisions. And it's about three main things. Firstly, it provides teachers with guidance in their design. The second is it represents a way of visualising design, and James Diel in Australia makes a nice analogy to music. So if you like, we're trying to get to an educational design language. And thirdly, it's about sharing. Teachers often learn best through just talking to colleagues. So it's about helping teachers to shift from an approach to design which is belief-based and implicit to one that's design-based and explicit. And we argue it encourages reflective scholarly practice and enables teachers to share and discuss their design ideas. So at Leicester, we recently combined the work I'd done at the Open University with the work at Leicester into a conceptual framework called the 7 C's of Learning Design. So the first is about creating a vision for the course. Then there are 4 C's to do with creating resources, fostering ways in which we can communicate and collaborate, and consider to do with reflection and assessment. The combined C is about stepping back and looking at the design from different perspectives. And finally, it's about implementing the design in a real-life context. And all the resources I'm going to show you and more are available online at this link at the bottom. I will, of course, leave the slides, so you're welcome to circulate them. So under the conceptualised C, one of the activities is called the course features. Groups are given a pack of cards, and the cards relate to these 6 aspects of the overarching vision for the course. What kind of principles underpin the course? What kind of pedagogical approaches are in scope? What forms of guidance and support are there? What kind of content and activities are there? What ways are students encouraged to reflect and demonstrate their learning? And how are they being enabled to communicate and collaborate? The broader context of this work fits in what we call the Larnaca Declaration, which is available online, and that's led by James Diel in Australia, but a group of us have been articulating what we mean by learning design over the last few years. In terms of the broader context, we've also been involved in a project called Metis, which has created a complete online learning design tool. It's very exciting because it goes right through from conceptualisation of the design through to actual implementation completely in a virtual learning environment. This is another of the C's. This is called the course map, and this enables you to map out in detail the kind of guidance and support, content and activities, reflection and demonstration, and communication and collaboration. This is under the combined C, so this enables you to look at the profile for the students, how much time they're spending on assimilative activities like reading, viewing and listening, information handling, communication, making things, experiential like drill and practice, adaptive, which is quite specialised, it's to do with modelling and simulation, and the amount of time on assessment. And finally, we put it all together into what we call a storyboard. So we list the weeks and the topics at the top, the learning outcomes down the side, and then we have the activities that students are engaging with. So you can see in week 1 they're reading a document and watching a video, and then what they produce. So in this case, in the first week the students have produced a document, the second week a podcast, and finally they take part in a group presentation and they write a reflective essay on their learning. And then we can map the assessment elements. The first week it might be the teacher giving formative feedback, the second week it might be peers commenting on their blog, and finally it might be a summative assessment. And we check that all of the learning outcomes are actually mapped against those assessment elements. So that's kind of it. We've put all these packages together into a series of workshops, and I say all of these are available online. So I just wanted to finish by saying if you're interested in some